Yeah, as Professor Smith mentioned, so the insights I'm going to present today are based on the research I did on the social epidemiology of obesity in women in low middle income countries. And I did the PhD here at UCL with Michael Marmot and finished it last year. So one of the biggest insights is understanding why I was an overweight child and then lost the weight, having lived in England as a child and then moved to Algeria. And I'd like to thank Tim Lang, who actually challenged me to answer that question. He'll be speaking later. And if you're interested, I can talk to you about it later. So what are we trying to explain? Very simply, we're trying to explain why we've gone from that end to this end. And the tagline is that we've gone from living agricultural lifestyles with not much food around to living very sedentary lifestyles in office-based jobs with a lot more food around. So as Jonathan mentioned earlier, there's an issue of imbalance in energy. So a lot of countries in the developing world, or lower middle income countries, are going through this transition, and they're going through it very quickly. And I just wanted to show you this slide to show you one of the effects of going through that transition very quickly, because we don't see this in high-income countries. We see this in low-middle-income countries. So you get stunting coexisting with obesity, or diseases of undernutrition coexisting with diseases of overnutrition. So here in Egypt, from 92 to 2008, there's been a decline in childhood stunting, but there's been an increase in maternal obesity. And possibly as a result, the number of households that have a stunted child and an obese mother living together has gone up. So instead of improving the nutritional situation in Egypt, if you measure it according to by these households, things are getting worse. And the percentage of households where there's an obese stunted child and obese mother has gone up. It's about 10% in Egypt currently, according to this data. So a little glitch there. Again, this equation is how a lot of policymakers, for example, have thought about obesity in the past. So, it's a matter of energy in, energy out. There's an imbalance. People are eating too much, so they just need to stop eating. But when you start thinking about why people eat too much, then you start thinking about individual psychology. Psychology based on habits that were formed in childhood, that are probably influenced by developmental patterns and maybe the behavior of mothers during their pregnancy. And also habits that were formed at school, for example. So as a policymaker, you might want to say, we have to do something about schools, but then schools say, well, no, it's about the parents. And the parents will say, well, no, it's happened to me when I was pregnant. I can't do anything about it now. So it starts to get a bit complicated. The price of food. Here, you don't worry too much about the details, but this is the price of fruit and vegetable over time in the US, increasing. This is the price of butter, fat, and sugar, I think, going down. So that's another factor that shapes people's individual choices. And again, the environment. It's the economic model of preferences, price, and availability. So this is the availability bit of that model. So, and all of these things are interlinked. And if you try and join them up, you end up with this, which comes from the Foresight diagram, which is a government report on the causes of obesity. And if you want to take a deep dive into obesity, I'd recommend you have a little read or speak to Tim Lopstein there. But I still think there's a simple story we can put on obesity to try and help us move forward as to what we can do about it. And I think it's something around the social relations that exist in society. This is the merchant of Venice preparing to chop a pound of flesh off Antonio because he wasn't able to pay his debt. So to me, that equates flesh with money or money-related motives. And I think there's a parallel with obesity in that every pound of flesh this little boy puts on is making someone else some money. I said it's a simple story. And the ironic thing is that some of us then go and pay money to have that flesh removed. So to me, there's something about the relationship between our bodies and the economy or the society that we live in, and which to me starts to raise some questions as to what kind of society we live in, and whether we want to continue living in that society, considering some things are off, as in obesity prevalence. Sorry about this. So coming back to data, this is a graph showing the prevalence of obesity in a country against the level of economic development. And there's a broadly positive correlation in that the more developed the country is, the higher the level of obesity, linked to that original story of the changes in the availability of food and the type of job that we do, or our levels of physical activity. But that it's not perfect. You see Egypt and Jordan here are poorer, but they have much higher levels of obesity. So there are probably issues around cultural norms and other factors that I won't go into detail here. We also know that within countries, there's a social distribution. So it's not that obesity is haphazard and everybody's affected. There's a clear social pattern that seems to change over time as countries develop. So this shows the prevalence or the risk of obesity by level of education. So this is the high level of education. This is the low level of education. These are poorer countries. These are less poor countries, and these are middle-income countries. So in the poorer countries, the more well-off, as indicated by education here you are, the higher your risk of obesity. So it's the more well-off, richer people who are more likely to be obese. In the richer countries, it's the opposite, which is what we see in the UK. So if you're less educated and poorer, you're more likely to be obese. So it's the opposite. And in the middle, you have this intermediate pattern. And this is from my some of the research I did. If you take education and income separately, you see that in middle-income countries like Egypt, where the environment is changing very rapidly and you're getting an influx of calories, including soft drinks, for example, the wealthier a woman is, the more likely she is to be obese, which is the kind of pattern in the poorer countries that I showed you in the previous slide. But education seems to, formal education, not health education, education in high schools and universities, will take that edge off. It will protect you against that effect. And this was seen not just in Egypt, but in a sample of middle-income countries. So it seems to be a pattern that explains a little bit what's going on in the middle range of development. So the environment's changing as the country is developing, more calories available. So having come from an environment of scarcity, possibly people think, oh great, more calories, I've got the money, I'm going to buy that. And being plump is good, because in the cultural norms, traditionally it was good to display that you had access to that kind of energy. But educated women seem to cotton onto something and just be immune, if you like, to that effect, which starts that process whereby then educated, richer women are going to be protected against obesity. But the point is, it's not just about income, it's also about education, which to me says something about the ability to make decisions within this environment that's coming a bit more unhealthy. So just to put it more simply, I think that what's happening in middle-income countries is that you have, the environment's changing, there's an influx of calories. The public health systems can't necessarily deal with these new health risks like obesity and the aggressive marketing that some of the transnational companies, for example, operate in. And as a result, education can help protect you against that, because although there's not a widespread health knowledge within the society, because you have a high level of education, you might be able to access more information and also use it to make decisions that protect your health against the rapidly changing environment. And the problem is that there's an information asymmetry if you don't have that level of education. So you've got all these new health risks, but if you've got a low level of education, you may not be able to cope with that. Whereas in a high-income country, the public health system or other forms of media might be able to support you. So just coming back to that original relationship, some people talk about obesity as a form of structural violence, because in the UK, for example, it does affect lower income groups, less educated people. And we see that that's where middle-income countries are heading towards. So this is eventually what you end up with. You end up with obesity in the lower-income, more deprived groups. And structural violence describes that. It describes any system that inflicts or takes away health or inflicts harm to a particular group. So in this case, the more deprived groups. And whereas geese don't necessarily have a choice in what they're fed, they don't have that much control over their environment. We do. And if it's politically too difficult to regulate the big players that shape our food environment, then it is, in the end, up to us as individuals to stand up and say, no, sorry, you can sell me food that nourishes me and sustains me and that I might enjoy, but you can't overfeed me and take away my health by selling me this high-fat, high-calorie stuff. So if we accept that as a value, as something we want to take on as a society, then it then becomes a bit easier to see how that translates at different levels. So I've just put some examples here of what we can do at different levels, depending on where you are, either as an individual or in your work or as a citizen. There are lots, and it'd be interesting to hear about what kinds of things you might think we'd be able to do, but I just thought I'd put some examples up there for you. I won't go through them because I think I've overrun. Thank you.
Thank you.